Their hiring is a lot more transparent. The pay bands are right there. If you apply to the government, it says what level you're applying for, what the pay band is. I'm sure you've heard the ratio in academia that women were being paid 80 cents on the dollar. They did a study on that. Don't advocate enough for themselves. Talk about applying to jobs. A man will apply to a job if he only fits maybe 20% of the listings, and they're like, oh, I can learn the rest, right? They're confident enough to apply for that. Women, if they don't see that they match 80% of what's there, won't apply. So we're already self-selecting out of these potential roles.
Today, I'm super happy to have with me Alexandra Reid, also known as Lexi Reid, and you'll see she has an artist website. That's her name. Lexi is a former scientist and regulatory affairs specialist. We have had colleagues of yours on the show who spent over a decade working across research, government, and medical device development. After experiencing burnout, she turned to simple creative practices to manage stress and reconnect with herself. Now, Lexi supports high-achieving women in STEM to do the same through coaching grounded in neuroscience, mindfulness, and art therapy-inspired tools. Her approach offers a calm and thoughtful way to reset while still honoring an analytical mind. Lexi, so happy to have you here with me today. You're in BC, I'm here in Quebec, so there's a few hours of difference. I haven't visited BC, I really want to, well, this is, at least for me, it's a real pleasure to be visiting virtually like this and to be talking with you today.
No, thank you for the invite, David. I really appreciate being on the show, and you get to have a virtual visit in my art studio, as we were talking about earlier before the call. But yes, I live in Victoria, BC. It is on Vancouver Island, and it is definitely one of the more scenic places, I'd say, on Earth, let alone just Canada. So if you ever want to see oceans, mountain, and forest all in one go, this is the place to be.
No, it's definitely on the list of places to go in Canada that we haven't managed to get there yet, but we will. So, Lexi, there's a lot of things to unpack in the little intro that in the bio that I shared in the beginning. But before we get to what brought you to what you do today, the different elements of it, maybe I think an interesting starting point is your how you got to become a scientist, what drew you to the academic journey, to the academic path. Maybe quickly talk about the work that you did after getting your academic degree and going into these different domains related to medicine, medical devices, regulatory affairs, because I know that a lot of listeners out there have heard of things like medical writing, medical affairs, regulatory, CROs, and it'll feel like known terrain for them. So it's maybe a good point to start a conversation. But then, of course, it's going to be very interesting to me, and I really want us to dive into what came after and your current mission of helping women in STEM, get how can I say, in control of things that maybe feel difficult, chaotic, anxiety-inducing, etc. So, but let's start with the beginning. What was your journey, and how did you, what brought you from one step to the next in this story that I told really, really fast?
Sure, I will do the academic ladder story. So I did biology at Queen's. I got interested in fourth year in actually applied plant science. I worked in a lab that had a plant biotech company spin out of the university called Performance Plants. So I learned. That was back before, GMOs had such a bad rap, I would put it. So it was kind of new cutting edge science at the time. And I was a fourth year undergrad. I did a thesis project in that lab. And that led me to doing my master's in plant physiology at Guelph. And from there, I went and did a plant molecular biology PhD at the University of Calgary. And again, I chose my supervisor. He was the Dow Agro Plant Biotech Chair. And again, he spun out a company out of his lab called Symbiosis Genetics. And he was very thoughtful about having his graduate students actually develop intellectual property. I actually was a co-inventor on a patent. The University of Calgary was very liberal with IP ownership. It was one of the more liberal ones. The university actually let the inventors own it. The university kind of took a step back. And so again, I was sort of pursuing my interest. I really liked the application of the science I was doing. And that led me to doing a postdoctoral fellow at Agriculture Canada in London, Ontario. And it's funny, I was doing my postdoc, and it's funny, as a postdoc, the job of a postdoc is usually to find your next job. And so I was sharing a very cramped office with about 8 other postdocs. And yeah, it was, I felt like we were bunked on top of each other. And we spent a lot of time talking amongst ourselves about, was this the career for us? Did we want to continue being scientists? Did we want to look at being professors? Our friend of mine and I joked it was called research for a reason, because we kept redoing the same thing over and over again. As you do, you run experiments. They may not go to plan, you redo them. When you're working on plants and you're working with plant biotech, for instance, you're often doing a lot of things that have to remain sterile. Things would get contaminated. You'd have to throw out the whole experiment and start over, and plants take a while to grow. So there was a lot of, I wouldn't say futile work, but sometimes it felt a bit futile because you do all this effort and it would go nowhere. And so, I started thinking, well, what do I want to do after science? What if the lab work stopped being a passion for me, I have to say that. So I started, I was about 2 years into my postdoc. I had a year to go of funding. So I started looking at alternative careers. I looked at being a IP lawyer. I looked at being an IP officer. So, but that would mean moving to Ottawa because the Canadian Patent Office was in Ottawa. And I was currently in London, so that would mean uprooting the family. I also looked at doing my MBA, so that was one issue. I looked at becoming a high school teacher. I looked at a lot of different avenues of how I could use all of this education and science, and I ended up going to work for a not-for-profit called MyTax. And
Yeah.
you may be familiar with MyTax. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah, so essentially it's like running a co-op for graduate students. So they partner graduate students with companies to do applied research. And I loved it. I did a lot of networking events. I got to go out and meet, both the graduate students and their supervisors. I met a lot of companies. And it was, in fact, at one of these networking events, I was working quite closely running a networking event in partnership with the Canadian government, NSERC, so Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. And you may be familiar with them because they provide pretty much all the funding to research in Canada. And they had an opening in one of the regional offices. So I applied. And they really liked the fact that I had been working at MyTax, because a lot of what I had been doing there was very applicable to the role. So I became I went from being a director of business development at MyTax to becoming a research and innovation development officer at NSERC. And I was based in the office in Mississauga. So I basically worked with, there's about 22 universities in Ontario, and I worked with my colleague and I split them down the middle pretty much. So I was working with basically the University of Windsor up to the University of Toronto, plus 2 northern universities. So I had about 11 universities in my portfolio. And again, my job was to look after the Engage grant and evaluate research applications. And these were short-term grants, very high success rate. And the idea is that a professor would partner with a company to answer a company-specific problem, but using their research expertise. And so I worked at NSERC for close to a decade. both in Ontario, and then I actually moved to Victoria. My husband took a job out here, and I ended up doing basically the equivalent role I was doing in Ontario, but more on a contract basis. And it was at yet another networking event that I met somebody from Starfish Medical who actually knew my PhD supervisor. So, it's a small world.
Yeah.
And these conversations, I said what I was doing for the government, and they said, oh, it'd be really great if you could help us with our proposal writing. And so I came into a part-time basis to Starfish Medical through business development to do proposal writing. So the way Starfish Medical worked is they are an engineering consulting firm that builds medical devices for their clients. And these clients could be anywhere from a doctor with a great idea on a napkin sketch all the way up to the Strykers, the Medtronics, the Edwards, big companies that wanted to outsource some R&D that they didn't have time for to do internally. So I went from doing business development at Starfish Medical. The grant I was working on at NSERC was sunsetting, so it seemed like a good time to transition full-time to Starfish. And a role opened up within the Quality Assurance and Regulatory Affairs department within Starfish. And I applied internally for the role. And what's interesting is I actually had zero regulatory experience up until that point. But all my work that I had done for the government was what they called a translational skill. Technical writing, communication, attention to detail, analytics, all of that ported over perfectly to doing regulatory writing, quality assurance, again, because I was reviewing a lot of documentation, the engineers and the designs. So, obviously I had to learn the, regulatory side of things sort of on the fly, but we always had such different projects coming in the door. We were always learning. Because again, being a consulting firm, you work with what comes in the door. And, the FDA and Health Canada are often changing, their rules and regulations. So you always have to be learning on the fly. And yeah, so that brought me to Starfish Medical. During the pandemic, we landed a government contract to develop emergency ventilators. And at that point, we were all working from home. And that's when I started experiencing what I learned was burnout. Because we're working from home, I was juggling school-aged children at home. We were working 24/7 to develop these ventilators for the government. There was a lot of pressure to get them, in the hands of people as quickly as possible. And there was no break between work and home anymore. It all blurred. And it just felt like I had to be on all the time. And being in QARA, we were basically the last stop before the regulators, right? We were the ones that had to make sure the devices were safe and effective for people. And so there was a lot of pressure for that too. So my background, as you can see, is as a fine artist. And I actually got blocked creatively. It was just, everything was blocked. I was stressed from work. I couldn't make anything in the studio. And I actually turned to learning about art therapy because I thought there's got to be something here because, I like being creative. But I had to take the pressure off myself of creating something that was fine art, that was, quote, a finished product. And the best thing about learning about art therapy was the ability to learn to play again. It didn't matter how the drawing looked. It was more about almost like visually journaling my thoughts and feelings out. And it worked. It was these little quick wins, those little dopamine hits. It got a lot of stuff out that was in my head onto paper. And, I thought, oh, this is really neat. And then I kind of put it aside for a bit. We returned back to office. Life kind of returned to normal. But then the pace started picking up again. And, the pressure being in the office of, being on call all the time, I thought I could feel that sense of what I've, now learned was called burnout creeping up again. And with burnout, quite often you'll almost disassociate from your work. You'll start disassociating from people. You'll try to sleep, but you can't sleep, but then you're exhausted. And it starts becoming this quite vicious circle, actually. And So I started trying to develop these tools for myself of how can I, find that groundedness? How can I find that mindfulness without putting that undue pressure on myself? And that's kind of what led me to the path of doing this creative wellness coaching. And full disclosure, uh, I had been employed at Starfish Medical until the spring.
Mhm.
And as many life science companies, we underwent a series of layoffs. And unfortunately, I got caught in that net. And I'd always meant the creative wellness to be a coaching as a retirement project.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But I thought, this is the sign from the universe to make it real now.
Yeah.
And I had a business mentor and at the time, and she said when she first heard about my layoff, she thought, "Oh no!" And then she immediately thought, "Oh yes," because this was the sign that I kept telling her, "I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. It's not perfect. It's not ready." And she's like, "This is it. The universe is telling you it's ready now. You need to
Yeah.
be ready now." And so I started doing creative wellness coaching. I have a number of clients. I'm doing some pilot programs, testing out the curriculum, getting their feedback. And, so far the feedback I've been getting from these women is that it's been, at first they were worried it was one more thing to do, but
Hmm.
now they've prioritized it because they realize how good it makes them feel. And the fact that it does give them more energy and more space in their life, right? So it's everything that I was hoping it could be is turning out to be, which is really exciting for me. As when you develop something in your head, you're never entirely sure how it's going to land.
It's true.
It's like prototyping, right? You iterate and you iterate and you improve. And so all of it's interesting. All of these skills that I've picked up along the way, and it's marrying the science with the art, with learning how to do adult learning.
Hmm.
I did a lot of compliance training when I was in regulatory affairs, and learning how to work and get complex concepts, in a palatable way. So yeah, that's the winding path.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, no, it's amazing, and thank you for sharing all of that and all and what you've gone through, because I think it's um, and burnout I think is insidious in a way that I well, once you had it, then you felt it coming back later on, but the first time you have it, it must be just what's happening with me, like my creative mind space is kind of gone. I feel, I sleep but I don't rest, etc. And it I think, we've had an episode with Ozgun Unver just about burnout, and it has this insidious aspect to it that it just kind of creeps up on you, and then brings you to the brings you to your knees in a certain way, or empties your batteries completely, and then uh, there is there's some work you need to do to pick yourself up and avoid falling back into that. But it can come back. But there's so many things you said that that are interesting to me, and maybe I'm going to pick up on the first one, which is the creativity. So you are not the first scientist I know who has some sort of creative project. I've known people who are in bands, people who draw or do comics, people who love to write, people who do stand-up comedy. There's a lot of creativity in research, in academia. It comes out in different ways. Very often, there's one person in the research group who everyone goes to for the figures, for their for their posters or whatever. The other person is really good at correcting and writing in a certain way, etc. But it seems to me that the way you're talking, it's really, they're really not sporadic examples. You're working with different women, and all of them somehow have this creative or impulse is not the term that I want to use, but creative kind of creative part of their brain that they maybe underuse in the lab or in their research, and that they with you they use that to work on the different challenges that they're having. Do you have any reflection? Do you also know other academic artists? Is this something you've seen with all the people you've met?
Yeah, even, it's funny. My husband and I met in graduate school. So
Okay.
we actually were, floors apart. He was in biochemistry, I was in botany.
Okay.
And he's a woodworker. And
Uh,
that's so even though he runs a proteomics lab, he has, he de-stresses by working with wood. He makes, he bought a lathe. He now makes bowls. He makes paddles. We do a lot of kayaking. So he's made paddles for kayaking. In fact, the paddle I use, he made for me, custom made. I have a good friend who worked for the NIH in the US, and she loved pottery. She'd make these beautiful porcelain pots. And again, same thing, she said she found it very therapeutic. You just sit and you have to think about the clay on the wheel, because if you lose your concentration, you push too hard and it turns into a blob, right? So certainly when I was at Starfish, there was a number of people who were musical, as you mentioned. One guy's a drummer. In fact, sometimes on the weekend, he'd just busk for the fun of it.
Seriously, that's amazing.
Uh, yeah, so I've definitely, and the women in my group, one of them says, she was a quilter, but she couldn't let herself, she'd acquired all these beautiful fabrics, but she just she couldn't complete a project again because she got totally burnt out. And another one loved to cook, and she'd make these beautiful charcuterie trays for parties. And, so everyone does have those interesting outlets, but sometimes they feel selfish in taking the time to do this, right? Like, oh, I should really be working on my project. Oh, I should really be spending more time with my kids. Oh, I should be doing like, and I think what we have to be careful of, especially for women, because we tend to take on a lot of what they call the invisible labor, the child caring or caring for elderly parents, or looking after the household. And that's not put on a calendar typically, right? It has to get done. So it
Yep.
gets done
Every day.
every
Yeah.
day. Yes. So taking time for yourself to be creative in whatever channel that is, it does replenish your well. It does give you the energy to keep tackling your day. But you have to recognize and give yourself permission that it's okay to take the time for yourself. And that's what I'm working with a lot of these women is that ability to pause, to say no. Don't always just say yes to everything, because you feel like you'll be disappointing somebody if you say no.
Yeah.
And recognizing where you want to put your time and effort to, and realizing it's okay to say no, and giving yourself permission to do that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's very much part of the coaching aspect, in addition to the creativity.
Yeah, I'm interested in talking maybe a little later about why doing these different types of things. And you've mentioned people doing different things, but you mentioned also that all of them said that it kind of replenished them. Maybe we can talk about how that works and how you make it work for the people you work with, for the women you work with. But I'd like to, and you just mentioned the invisible tasks, or invisible invisible work that is often related with being a woman in a household with children, etc. But maybe widen the angle a little bit, and maybe talk about what are women in STEM today facing in the at their job in academia or outside of academia, that is bringing them to burnout. And I'm saying this because I keep having conversations, and although the terminology, the rhetoric around women in the workplace has changed and evolved in the last years, I talk with women, and there's still challenges out there. There's still a lot of friction, added friction in their professional lives that leads them often to this type of situation of being of their mental health being affected. What's your, knowing all these people and having worked with them and having yourself gone through it, we've heard your story, but what are maybe common challenges, common roadblocks that are still existing today in 2025?
Oh, I've definitely seen this play out literally in front of me in meeting rooms, for instance. So quite often we'd have client calls, and you know, I literally had to pull a chair up for one of my female colleagues because she parked herself in the corner. And I thought, no, no, you got to sit at the table with us. The client wants to hear from you. But she felt she couldn't push herself forward to sit at the table, quite literally. Like, I was like, and it's interesting. I talked with her, she actually ended up going to set up her own business because of many things like that. And she said that the moment you actually brought me to the table and made me feel included, I will always appreciate that. And I didn't even think about what I was doing at the time. I just thought, well, that's silly. I'm sitting at the table. Why aren't you sitting at the table? Like, the client needs to talk to you. And I've talked to a few other women, and it's so frustrating. They'll say a thought or an opinion, it gets ignored until their male colleague says literally verbatim the same thought or opinion. And everyone nods, saying, oh, that's super valuable. I'm so glad you shared that. And meanwhile, the woman's like, that was my idea. What? um, and that's still happening. Like, it's a lot of the quiet voices aren't being heard. And that can get so frustrating. So I don't know if unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of a gender bias still happening. There's still an authority bias still happening. And it's those little moments. I'll take an academic version. One of, the women in my husband's laboratory, she's been co-authoring a number of papers, collaborating, and she realized her name was being left off the paper by her collaborators. And she was just shocked, because she's like, I've done the work. I brought the project to you. What the heck? So it's still pervasive, I would say, this feeling of being shut out, the overlooked, or on the flip side, taken for granted. A lot of committee meetings, quite often they'll assume that you'll say, yes, of course you'll volunteer to be on that committee, without being explicitly asked. So there's a few things like that that just come to mind, which haven't been addressed yet. And yeah, I would say it's not by any means a level playing field yet. And, much as we like to say things are more equal, maybe they're more equal, but it's these little challenges, these little struggles are still happening on a daily basis. And, sometimes I would say women just sort of swallow it and carry on because they're there to get the work done and they take pride in their work. But it adds up, and
Yeah.
that's also what leads to burnout is all of these little things adding up.
Oh, for sure. And if, like we said, at home you're already carrying a huge part of the load, of the workload, and then now you're in this new committee, like you said, without having said yes, but of course you're going to say yes. Of course, then something's got to give, like like they say. And so yeah, so what you're telling me is that yes, we're in 2025. Yes, there's a lot of great rhetoric out there, but in practice there's things that we think are straight out of Mad Men, that series that was
Yes.
it's still happening today.
Oh, it is still happening today. I One of my government roles, I have a very clear memory of my manager saying to all the women in the office, we've got clients coming in tomorrow. Can you make sure you wear skirts? And I was like, I just went, what? Like,
Wow.
as you said, are we living at Mad Men? And I just looked at him. I'm like, are you serious? Like, oh, well, I just meant, look professional, wear something dressy.
Okay.
It's like,
Well, there you go. So
yeah,
this is exactly okay. So you're confirming what I was trying to
yeah,
kind of represent. So the issue, those issues are still there. I'm and of course I'm sure, and I see also that there's a lot of evolution out there. But I imagine that the more and more a woman wants to evolve in a career ladder, let's say, and manage and then get to more and more responsibility positions, the pressure exponentially rises, right? Because there's less as because the air kind of rarefies as you go up, meaning the more you go up, the less there are kind of allies, other women around you that you can be like appear with, and because all those pressures in the end up increasing. Is that something that you'd say is an approximation of what's happening?
definitely. I was quite lucky, I would say, working for the federal government
Sure. Yeah.
and the not-for-profit, because their hiring is a lot more transparent. The pay bands are right there. If you apply to the government, it says what level you're applying for, what the pay band is. I'm sure you've heard the ratio in academia that women were being paid 80 cents on the dollar. They did a study on that. And I think that's also true in corporate is, women don't advocate enough for themselves. Like if they talk about applying to jobs, a man will apply to a job if he only fits maybe 20% of the listings, and they're like, oh, I can learn the rest, right? They're confident enough to apply for that. Women, if they don't see that they match 80% of what's there, won't apply. So we're already self-selecting out of these potential roles. And as you mentioned, as you go up, the glass ceiling, it is a thing still. But yes, there are less allies in the room. There's less margin for error. Again, if you're still juggling all these home cares, you're expected to do that, quote, on your own time, right? You can't take time off for the sick child. Oh, I need to step out to do this. They're like, well, don't you have someone to do that for you? No, I don't. Like, I can ask my husband, but there's still
Routine.
definitely
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like there's less flexibility there. I know in Quebec at one point they looked at having universal childcare, right? That's something that the rest of the country didn't entertain, but would have
Hmm.
been great. There
Yeah.
was definitely a time where I feel like I was working to keep my kids in daycare.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, there's
but
a project now that to extend it to whole of Canada based on the Quebec model, but
mhm.
it for sure it's been a huge propulsor here of women deciding on their careers, because that's a huge part, like you said, in terms of time or finance. Like, either you pay for it a lot or you have to stay home and do it. So yeah, no, it's and all of those things count, and all of those things count in the mental burden.
Well, and also certainly it shows up in your resume, and then suddenly you have to justify, why is there a gap there? Why didn't you publish there? Why didn't you?
Mhm.
And then, again, if you're competing on paper with somebody who didn't take time out, you are sort of behind the eight ball, so to speak, right? Like
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
are playing catch up to show that you're equal and worthy. And yet, yeah, it is a challenge. I would still say we're a long way from making that a truly level playing field that way.
Yeah. And so thank you for that, and you confirmed some of the observations that I've had from other conversations. But thanks for bringing your experience and the experience of the women you work with, because I think it's important to keep saying it as long as it exists, and to putting it out there. And it's always better to have actual examples than just saying, oh, the system, there's problems with the system. No, here's specific examples and how it's affecting this person, but also women in general. Now, Um, in your case, is there a reason why you're working specifically with women in STEM?
Honestly, it's I've worked in so many different environments, academic, not-for-profit, government, corporate, all, and I've worked with a broad range of, when I was doing reviews, I worked with a lot of research, pretty much all areas of engineering, and then biology, physics, chemistry, mathematics. So I didn't understand the mathematics research, I have to say, as much. It was very, very in depth. Uh, but I got a sense of some of the challenges. I got to meet the women in those fields. So it's something that I feel comfortable emphasizing and relating to, which isn't to say that obviously women outside of STEM can't benefit from creativity and these exercises. I'm working with women who are far more, I would say, on almost like the pure business side, right? They came from more humanities and ended up in a technical field through basically, coming that direction. And they certainly benefit from this. It's just obviously when you're, if you try to appeal to everybody, you end up appealing to nobody.
Of course.
So I thought,
Yeah.
and I have a lot of experiences to share with women in, science, tech, engineering, and math, right? I've worked in a lot of areas of research, so I have a sense of the challenges they're facing, and I can relate. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the space you come from, and it doesn't make sense. I was just wondering whether, because it's been well known. I know if it's changed or if it's changing, but that, for example, engineering had a strong slant towards a lot of men, not a lot of women, and that, of course, all of those issues that we talked about a few minutes ago are exacerbated because already at the beginning the cohorts coming out, the representation is not there. That's why I was asking that, but no, it makes total sense. It's always, even in terms of connecting with an audience, if we come from where they come from, sorry, if we come from where they come from, it's easier to just reach out for them and find some common ground, and it makes total sense to me. Now I'm curious about the process of, because you were, like we said before, like you mentioned at the beginning, creativity, art, you know, building something with your hands, creating something artistic, or having some creative projects has this effect of recharging our batteries, let's say, just like that, very simplified. But of course, because we're scientists, I wonder whether you can either talk about what type of exercises or what type of things you do with the people you work with, or to talk about what's the process. Why is it that if I decide to take a piece of wood, put it in a lathe and create something, and then polish it and then oil it and whatever, why does that recharge my mental or emotional batteries? What's the process? I'm super curious about that, and but then we can also maybe just talk about your process and how you work with people.
I'll take that on two fronts. So one, there's definitely neuroscience behind creativity. I'm sure you've heard the term flow state.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's been shown that basically if you're in a creative process, whatever that is, your brain actually switches out of the anxious state it was and into a flow state. And so there is definitely, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I am very interested in the neuroscience behind how the brain operates. There's a terrific book that came out within the last year or so called Your Brain on Art. And those two authors do explore the neuroscience through various creative art forms, whether it's music, drama, beating drums. And they actually looked at how the brain is being imaged during those activities before and after. It's funny, I actually have a wellness device called Muse, which is put out by the company Interaxon. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically a home EEG, and it actually shows up on your phone as an app, and you can sort of see your brain waves before and after a meditative activity. And so I actually started wearing it to see how it was before and after I've been in my studio, just to sort of see how it switches. And it's very comparable to meditation. Because I was curious, look at the data, look at the, um, the gamma waves came up, which is the sign of hitting a more contemplative state. So again, I'm only using myself as a guinea pig there, but there is definitely science out there that supports the creative process. And it's when you disassociate the creative process from an end product,
Okay.
that's another thing. It's the actual process of being creative. And that's why when I do the exercises, which I'll speak to in a second, I emphasize the fact it's not about producing something good, right? It's more about just the act of playing, of putting your thoughts and your feelings on paper, right? It's taking away the judgment aspect of it, which is hard when you stare at a blank piece of paper and think, oh God, I got to make it look good, right? Like that's, so you mentioned batteries, and I actually have a visual exercise we do called batteries.
Okay.
And the idea is that you basically draw 3 to 5 rectangular shapes, and you can put little things on top of them to make them look like batteries. And you put little indicators up the side of percentages. And each battery represents some aspect of your life. It could be work, it could be family, it could be personal development, it could be spirituality. And you basically draw your percentage of how depleted it is or how charged it is. And you start looking, and then you start sort of drawing things that'll help replenish your battery next to it, like or just even journaling the thoughts that you have about, oh, my battery for work is like 20%. Like, why is that? Or my family time is super low. What are things I can do to bring that up? And somehow just by going through this simple exercise, like it's one that a lot of the women said, this has been my favorite exercise because I can see now where my energy levels are low and I can see what lights me up and I actually want to have more of. And it's a very simple exercise, literally drawing some rectangles with, some shading. So it's technically not very difficult, but the impact, that self-awareness, that self-reflection, there's a lot of things that happen that are nonverbal. A lot of things where we don't necessarily let our intuition lead us. And somehow when you sort of just draw it out, that taps into that side of things.
It's it's interesting. I love the I think I'm going to do the exercise. I like it.
It's very simple, but it's got
so
lot of, but it has a lot of impact. And that's the other thing is I know the women I work with are super busy, right? So I don't want to give them exercises that are going to take, hours. Like I want something that gives them immediate result in under 10 minutes. But then they can shoot. And the other thing is you can come back and look at it a week later and see if your percentages have shifted, if some feelings have changed, right? So it's a snapshot in time of how, you thought and you felt at that moment as well.
It's really interesting. And maybe we can talk about more exercises later, but this one and the last few minutes of our conversation actually have me thinking about not the neuroscience of how it works, but for example, when you said, oh, my colleague was like standing in the corner, which already physically put her farther away from the microphone or the webcam or whatever was being used, her voice wouldn't be able even to probably project and to be heard by the client because she was even physically kind of distanced from this. And it's a great metaphor for the whole issue of women being yes or no at in boardrooms, in decision, in positions of decision and responsibility. Is this distance, and where my mind took me is, and what's missing is the voice. So the voices that speak louder are the ones who are sitting at the table. Most of them, baritone male voices, and it feels to me, because I'm always thinking of the person listening to the episode or watching and thinking, how can I apply. If of course, I recommend you to get in touch with Lexi, and we'll talk about that soon, because I see the time has flown. But about how you can reach out to Lexi. But I want them to think, how can this apply to me? And the image that came to mind is you. If and I'm positing this, so you maybe come back and maybe correct it or whatever, but somehow you're in a situation where your voice is not reaching where you wanted it to reach, maybe because you are, for different reasons, self subtracting yourself from the being close to the table, but also because of these other things that are in your life, that are like we've already mentioned, family duties, etc., etc. And then I think what may be happening is that, because the context is what it is, because outside the models you see don't say otherwise, you kind of interiorize that, well, this is the way things are, and so my voice is a voice that just doesn't project. And now the image that comes to my mind is, what's the name of that movie with Whoopi Goldberg where she's a nun? She's not really a nun, but she's hiding in
Yes.
and then there's this girl who has a great voice but doesn't have the courage to project her voice, and then Whoopi comes and like pushes her in the belly and projects her voice outside. And it feels like with these exercises and with these kind of moments of creation without judgment, and that's where I think it was really interesting that you said without judgment, because there's so much judgment in that's this other room that we're talking about, right? That you're helping them find their voice in another context, but find their voice, accept it, and then be creative about it, and then eventually, hopefully, and maybe you have stories to share, be able to, in that setting, also say, well, I'm able to be creative with Lexi. I'm actually proud of what I've created. It's something new, different, and really of my own. I can also channel that in my work. I don't know if this was too poetic or, but
No, I love that image. And I know the movie you mean.
yeah. What's the name of the
But
movie?
I'm totally blanking, but
Yeah,
I can
totally me too.
see Whoopi in the nun outfit totally.
Yeah.
But but yeah, there is that sense of being seen and being heard, right? But a lot of these women have to realize they need to place value in themselves first. And we unlearn that. And it's unfortunate. We
Yeah.
learn to be, like children are meant to be seen and not heard. And,
Yeah.
the good girl will do what she's told. And, there's a lot of conditioning, I would have to say, that has to be undone. We're afraid if we stand up to the microphone, we're going to be seen as too, bold for her britches, right? Like there are so many phrases that are not helpful. Let's put it that way. Um, so we need to have that self-confidence to literally speak up for ourselves, to literally sit at the table as an equal and not feel like you're intruding into the boys' club, right? Like it shouldn't feel like you need to force a spot. But if you believe you should be at the table and you should be the one speaking into the microphone, you need to have the confidence in yourself to do that. And certainly with doing these activities, and honestly, it's not, the creativity is one aspect, but I do follow-up conversations with them and we discuss what they mean to them. And it's that reflection and awareness building. There was one exercise we did called the bridge, and the idea is you build on one side of the land or whatever, the stuff you want to leave behind, and on the other side of the land is the stuff you want to work towards. And you draw your bridge, and you can build your bridge out of planks, you can build it out of stone, you can build it out of like the Golden Gate Bridge, it could be stainless steel. And I had one client who said, I didn't realize I've built my bridge full of holes and there's turbulent water underneath and I don't know how to swim. But I didn't realize I was doing this to myself until I literally was talking about it with you and looking at what I drew. It should just, it just was an unconscious thing that she was drawing her literal obstacles that she was putting in front of herself, in front of the choices she wanted to work towards. And, she drew it, thought about it, but it wasn't until we actually talked about it afterwards. There's that extra level of reflection when you share your stories. And that's why I like, why I call it creative wellness coaching, is because there's the creative part, which helps you tap into your wellness, but then there's the coaching part, which also helps tap into the wellness. So it's sort of bridging those things together, sharing the stories. So
Yeah.
that's something that I'm working with as well.
One thing that I didn't ask you, and I'm going to ask you now, is this a group? So are these women in small groups of 4 or 5, or is this one-on-one with you?
I was running a pilot over the summer where I've been doing it one-on-one because I was developing the curriculum.
Mhm.
But the plan is to launch it as a group program, which I will be launching in the fall.
Okay.
And ideally, it would be groups of 8 to 10 women. Because I am doing it over Zoom, I do want people to have equal time, equal airtime to share their stories. And so, and I also want to, I live on an island. I want to open it up globally to
Course.
women.
Of course.
Obviously, the magic of technology, we can talk.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, there you go.
it makes sense because I was asking because and I find it logical or and interesting that what you think that you chose the group path, because I think the community aspect, like you said, sharing sharing one-on-one is one thing, but if you have like around the table 2-3 different peers that are sharing their different stories, and then you find commonality between yours and A, but also then yours and C, and then you see, okay, I'm not alone. That like this thing that I'm living through, it's not my burden, my fault, my default. My default's not the what I want to say, my defect. It's actually something that other people are going through. So we actually are kind of a tribe, and we actually can inspire each other. And anyway, I because again, thinking of the person listening, watching, if you are somewhere and you're already creative, and you've noticed that another woman in the lab does crochet or whatever, maybe you can get together and build something like what Lexi is doing around you, let's say in graduate school, and say, you know what, let's have a bubble of time where we're just working and talking and thinking just about what we're creating as a small community. I think there's power there, and of course there's always place for one-on-one work if you want to work on a specific thing very intensely. But I do imagine, and I see the table behind you, and I imagine it's I imagine how cool it can be. And this is a bit, it's not off topic completely, but in the last few years we've discovered close by here in Montreal a place. It's a kind of a co-op also, but they offer courses in woodworking. What did I do with my son? Bookbinding, this that. But then when you go, there's 3 other parents with their kids, or just when I went for the woodworking, it was just grown-ups, 3 people your age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, and there was an energy there. There was something there that made it really a lot of fun, and it wasn't just the thing I was doing; it was also the fact that we were there. That's why I asked the question.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Like I definitely designed the program for a group, but as I'm learning from this pilot, there is that wonderful one-on-one deep connection, like these deeper conversations. So I like the fact that I'm able to offer both. So that's something that, originally I was only thinking the group aspect, but now that I've gone through this pilot with individuals, I can see there's a lot of value to the one-on-one side of things. So I think it's a very nice partnership, the two of those things. Like some thoughts may come out of the group program where they want to explore them more deeply with me on a one-on-one. And
Mhm.
sometimes it just comes down to that feeling of trust and safety when it's just one-on-one, right?
Yeah. No,
That,
for sure.
yeah,
There's not everyone
exactly. Yeah,
feels comfortable being in a group of people they don't know. That's totally true.
yeah.
Lexi, time has flown. We're almost at an hour of talking here, and but it's been so interesting. I wonder. Well, before we kind of try to wrap up, and maybe I can ask you kind of my like a final question for the people for the audience. If people want to reach out to you, I can already tell you that the links that we are going to mention are going to be in the show notes. So be it on your podcast app or on YouTube or wherever you're listening or watching, there's going to be the links. I'm going to want to include the link to Your Brain on Art, the book that you mentioned.
It's an excellent read. I highly
Yeah.
recommend it.
Okay. And so I'll find it, and I've already taken a note to put it in the show notes. But how do people reach out to you? What's the best way to maybe comment on or ask a few questions about what we talked today on the show?
Yeah, I would say easiest thing is to go to my website, which is mindartwellness.com. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter, which comes out with creative prompts each week. There's also a free 5-day challenge, which is delivered via email. So you get a creative prompt for 5 days. And then there's information about the group program there too. And also any past podcast episodes like this one, I put them on under my resource page. Some book reviews. There's actually a book review on Your Brain on Art on there as well. So, and also links to my YouTube channel, which is also the same name, Mind Art Wellness as well. So I'm
Great.
trying to grow my resources so people can kind of self-serve themselves, but I'm definitely happy to be followed up with as well. I do offer free clarity calls to talk about coaching as well.
Excellent. Can people reach out on LinkedIn or add you on LinkedIn if they're
Oh yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn as well too. So yeah,
perfect?
and I believe that link will be in the show notes. So yeah, either way, send me a DM on LinkedIn, reach out to me there. Happy to talk about science or art or both.
Excellent. And for those who are watching on YouTube and are seeing the paintings behind you, I can tell them it's if you go to lexireidstudio.com, you'll find Lexi's art. So yeah, I was waiting for you to maybe mention it, but I'm putting it out there. Maybe some people
Perfect. Yes.
are inclined to go look to go browse. Lexi, so thank you, and again for you who are watching, for you who are listening. Don't hesitate to add Alexandra Lexi on LinkedIn to ask her questions or just give feedback on the conversation or share your story. Same thing with me. If you have a story that resonates with some of the things we talked about today, yeah, put it in the comments. Write us on LinkedIn. Any feedback is super appreciated. Now we're again just getting to the end of our conversation, and I often like to ask the guest to have a word of motivation and in this case, if someone and we're talking about, of course, about women in STEM, be it in graduate school or postdoc or wherever they are in their career. If you're in a difficult moment, feeling that maybe or already that burnout is around the corner, do you have any words of comfort, but maybe also advice for them on how to navigate this, and maybe what they should do, like starting today, to avoid it if they're not past that corner yet, no, but if they are already burnt out, to manage that as best as possible, to then come back to a balanced and fulfilling but peaceful professional life.
Well, definitely my advice would be you almost need to take stock of what's important to you, right? That's when we talked about the battery exercise, that's the simplest thing to do, is to take stock of what is a priority for you, what's urgent, what's important, and realize that you need to put yourself first as well. They talk about, being on the airplane, you need to put your own oxygen mask on first, because if you don't do that, you can't help anybody else in your work life, your family life. And to give yourself that moment to pause and say no. If it's not, something that you have the capacity to do, you have the passion to do, and give yourself permission to just take that pause. And I think that goes a long way to resetting the imbalance that burnout leads to, and that vice versa. Imbalance leads to burnout, burnout leads to imbalance. Yes. So it's okay to put yourself first. And I think that's something that all women and men can hear as well.
Yeah. And then and just for me, and again, I'm glad that you finished with it. It's important to put yourself first, or it's okay to put yourself first. You deserve it, and you have permission, and you should do it, especially if it's your mental health. But also at the workplace, it's okay to put yourself first too, and it's okay to have your voice heard. And if you need to, pull up a chair and sit right in front of the mic to do it, it's okay too. And the more you do it, the more the woman beside you who was standing in the corner will feel, oh, then I can do it too. And
pull the chair up for her.
And pull the chair up for her, exactly. And pull the chair up for her. So again, Lexi, this was a great conversation. I really, I'm so happy that we connected. I hope we keep in touch. And yeah, I really hope that people out there listening do write, do give feedback on our conversation, and maybe share some stories, because like you said, or like you confirmed, there's still a lot of work to do, and there's still a lot of challenges out there for women in STEM, but not only in STEM. And my wish is, and I've had a lot of conversations about this on the mic, off the mic, and I'm an ally, or I consider myself an ally, and I really want this conversation to one day be not necessary anymore, because we'll be past that cape, which we haven't yet. So thank you.
I look forward to that day as well.
So thank you, Lexi. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone for you who are listening, subscribe to the show on your podcast app, on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And yeah, leave your comments. It's always appreciated. And it gives me a chance, or gives us a chance to then respond and be in touch with you, which is always great. So see you soon.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.